Peace and blessings, family. Baba Sankofa coming at you again today. Today I want to talk to you about a phrase I've been hearing a lot lately from people, actually the past couple of years. Do your research. I always wonder, or I'm wondering, what does that mean? I know what they may be implying by saying that, but what does it actually mean? Are people engaging in the task of undertaking serious study by doing serious research? I'm talking active digging. Is that what's occurring? In my opinion, I would say no, because America is the most unscientific society on the planet. And we know this because today people are quick to put their feelings on par with facts, data, and evidence. This is a sad state of affairs. Because we all know, those of us who engage in serious study, we know that context is everything. Without context, you have no understanding. And this is a big problem when it comes to talking about doing research, especially in this day and time when there are a lot of erroneous ideas and perspectives floating about. They exist because people aren't doing research. One of which is, you often hear people say, we were already here. And I'm speaking to people who are of African descent, or black people in America, brown people, or copper people, like as they like to be called. They love to say we were already here. And if you go back in time in history and begin to do a little studying, these kinds of claims weren't widespread 25 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago. This is indeed some new information, new ideas, new feelings. Again, we're in this unscientific society. People today are divorced from print literature. No one's reading. In fact, no one's taken into account the hard work that many scholars have done. I've already did the hard work. There are a plethora of scholars. Sometimes even online, I see people disrespecting scholars who have done the work. This is an atrocious tragedy. You can't look in any civilized empire or civilization in world history and see whereby the populace would disrespect the scribes, or those who were the studious ones amongst them, the adepts and the servants of information, who were spreading information and keeping count of the knowledge and wisdom collected from those scholars in previous times. But today we do that. We disrespect them, we disregard them, we don't even consider them. So this is indeed an atrocious tragedy. But what do we mean by doing research? We know research, broadly speaking, in a basic sense, it means to collect information to answer a question in order to solve a problem, to find solutions to a problem. This is the reason we do research. We do research in a basic sense for the purpose of answering a question, to solve a problem. There are scientific processes and methodologies for doing so. I'll give you an example. A few years back, when I was doing a little research on the enslavement of African people by Arabs and foreigners, this history, the historical period I'm talking about, was prior to the European enslavement of African people. There was a book called Islam's Black Slaves. And in this book, I was unfamiliar with the author. And since I was unfamiliar with this author, there was a tactic I learned from a historian. His recommendation was to go to the index of a book if you are unfamiliar with the author. You go to the index and you find the point of information that you are most familiar with. You go to that part in the book, you read to see if their point of view and explanation is accurate, you could trust them. And so I did that. And in going inside the book, he said, and we were talking about Malcolm X's conversion, this is something I was familiar with. He said, or made the claim, that Malcolm X was converted to Islam by a cellmate. However, we all know from reading the autobiography of Malcolm X that Malcolm X was converted to Islam by his siblings, Ella Collins, Reginald Little, Filbert, and Wilfred Little. They would come and visit him, they would send him letters, and this is what provoked his conversion to Islam. So immediately I understood I couldn't trust any other information in that book that I expected to learn from that author, because he didn't get that small piece, and that's a minor piece of information, correctly. He got it wrong. So I couldn't trust his information. Again, in speaking to this unscientific society, you can see people in positions of power who are confused as to what reality is. For instance, this argument of critical race theory. They consider teaching black children about African history, about enslavement, about oppression, about white supremacy to be a form of critical race theory when it isn't. Critical race theory is a methodology or tool used in universities by law professors and law students to analyze points of disparity in American society and how it affected the marginalized and disenfranchised people in this country, particularly black people. That's a broad sweep explanation of what critical race theory is. That's not used or applied in any school classroom across this nation. However, you have pundits and you have popular politicians and others who use this as a platform to erase and eradicate the learning and study of African history by black children in this nation. Again, it's a tragedy. We live in an unscientific society. Additionally, when you think about the Bible, for instance, I'll use this as another example. There are over 1 billion Christians on the planet. And in looking at the books of the New Testament, we'll pick out the Gospels particularly, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, because these are reputedly the accounts of Jesus' life, a biographical sketch of his life and his dealings here on the planet. But unfortunately, we know that the Gospels are pseudepigrapha. We know that they were written, well, scholars know that these documents were written anonymously. They are not authentic in the sense that Matthew wrote Matthew, Mark wrote Mark, Luke wrote Luke, and John wrote John. Scholars don't know, the New Testament critics, that is, don't know who wrote those documents. You know, Jesus supposedly was crucified in around 33 AD or ACE. But these documents didn't emerge or come on the scene until upwards of 60, 70, and sometimes 150 years after his alleged crucifixion. So imagine, right now we know that Dr. King was assassinated April 4th, 1968. Most folks aren't clear on the position of Dr. King when he was assassinated. I mean, still today in 2023, we're running around saying, oh, I have a dream, Dr. King, and this is what they celebrate. Not understanding that before Dr. King passed away, he said himself that his I have a dream speech was superficial and needed to be tempered with a little realism. And there's a video on YouTube of him saying this. There's a video of an entire interview of Dr. King making this claim, but we never, ever discuss that part of his life, and some of us don't know. We don't know it. So how can we trust literature 2,000 years ago that's written by anonymous people when today we have videos and other forms of documentation about someone who existed in our lifetime, and we can't get that right? So it's important that we understand the critical nature of valid information. We should know how to evaluate that information. We should understand that there's a methodology, that there's a scientific method to studying history and to digging and doing research. We can't just haphazardly say, do your research. Again, what does that mean? Are we talking about collecting evidence, using that evidence, evaluating that evidence? Are we talking about proof and probability? Are we talking about analysis and synthesis before you present this information? Are we taking into account that a lot of information that we have access to is biased information? I mean, because you live in America, which is the most anti-black nation on the planet, all the information in the biased society are slanted towards the ruling class of that society. We're talking academically, we're talking as far as entertainment, we're talking about all scope, the law, written laws, everything is slanted towards the ruling class of any society. Having said that, how do you sift through that to arrive at the truth? How do we do that? There's a quote by the Fabian, a socialist scholar, Eric Blair, you know as George Orwell, where he said, until they become conscious, they will never rebel. And until after they have rebelled, they will never become conscious. So again, in closing, we must understand the importance of doing research. I think it's a good suggestion to do your research, but I think we need to get back to dealing with print literature because, again, most of us are divorced from print literature. We aren't reading periodicals. We aren't reading journals. We aren't reading theses, dissertations. We aren't reading monographs. We aren't reading different works of literature. We're not up to date with improvements and new findings in archaeology, anthropology, and history of these things. And we're talking about our lives. And so since we aren't, again, we have a lot of frivolous and erroneous ideas and concepts and beliefs just floating around. And couple that with people's ignorance and arrogance, it's a recipe for disaster. So we want to get away from that. We need to be about the business of being honest, being truthful, and being dignified, especially those of us who are presenting information to people. We want to do so from a sincere perspective. We don't want to mislead people and have them going down a rabbit hole of confusion, which many of us are. It's sad and it's unfortunate. And the final note, when undertaking any serious in-depth study, you must be mindful to remove yourself from the information. A lot of times we have feelings and beliefs about particular things we hold dear in our lives. And so when we're reading and when we're doing research, we sometimes can't disconnect or separate ourselves from the information, which in turn will present or provoke a flawed conclusion. You must be sincere with yourself, you must be honest with yourself, and you must remove yourself from the process. If you are presented with any information that you may not agree with, you must have enough integrity to change your direction. You must be able to shake off or put down any information that wasn't valid or was erroneous. And in doing so, you will arrive at a better conclusion. You will have a greater grasp and understanding of how things were and why reality is the way it is. With that, if you have any criticisms or questions or comments, please leave them below. Until the next time, peace.